You can search for Solomon in the pages of Scripture. You can trace his name through ancient scrolls, peer through the fog of lineage and legacy, examine the architecture of the temple he built. But if you stop at what's written plainly, you'll miss him entirely. Because Solomon doesn't merely reside in history, he hovers in that liminal space where myth whispers into reality, where belief fuses with code and language, ceases to be a means of communication, and becomes a tool to mold existence itself. Solomon was not just a monarch who sat on a throne. He was an operator of the unseen, a spiritual technician, a wielder of divine names too sacred to be spoken aloud. He bound entities with syllables, inscribed intentions into matter, and constructed a temple for the presence that no building could ever contain. We are not here to discuss the Solomon of Sunday sermons, the wise king who settled disputes with cutting insight. We're not telling the bedtime version. We are diving into the Solomon whispered about in the corners of dimly lit yeshivas, the one contemplated by Sufi mystics who saw him as a master over jinn, the Solomon who rides the wind in ancient Arabic manuscripts, who commands demons with engraved rings and sacred seals. This is the Solomon of Hermetic grimoires and Hebrew alchemy, the man who turned words into swords, geometry into spells. And in this journey, we won't merely discuss what history remembers, we will search between the lines through the veils for what history was never meant to reveal. Are you ready to open a door that doesn't exist in space, but in spirit? When Solomon raised the temple, he didn't just build with stone and cedar. He took letters of fire used by God to shape the universe and translated them into structure. What he created wasn't merely a house of worship, it was a metaphysical machine, a sacred engine humming across dimensions. To most, it stands as a cultural landmark, a moment in Hebrew religious achievement. But to the initiates, to those attuned to the deeper currents, the temple is a mirror of the cosmos. It is a key to the higher realms. It wasn't designed to house mortals, but to welcome the infinite. Kabbalistic tradition tells us the universe was fashioned with 22 Hebrew letters, not metaphorically, but literally. Each letter is alive with vibration number and divine geometry. These are not symbols, they are the atoms of reality. So when Solomon built, he didn't use only brick or blueprint. He traced letters through space, writing sacred intention into the very walls. The Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation said to be penned by Abraham or inherited by Solomon through a stream of mystical wisdom, details how these letters seal the four corners of the universe. Imagine that a building that holds the world together with sound and shape, a space where geometry is not design, but invocation, the Holy of Holies. The inner sanctum was a perfect cube, 20 cubits tall, wide and deep. For the average reader, this is just a curious detail, but for those who understand, the cube is sacred. It is the stabilized earth, the axis where spirit lands, a three-dimensional expression of divine balance. It is also the symbol of the perfected self, the cubic stone the alchemist's goal realized. Gershom Scholem, perhaps the most respected modern scholar of Jewish mysticism, called Solomon's Temple the architectural embodiment of the tree of life. Every room, every lamp, every curtain symbolized a sephirah, a divine attribute or energy. Walking through the temple wasn't just moving through space, it was ascending the map of creation, an inner right from Malkuth to Kether, from earth to divine crown. And this idea, this blend of architecture and the sacred, isn't unique to Israel. In ancient Egypt, temples were believed to be the frozen bodies of gods. In India, mandalas serve as cosmic dwellings. In the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, stained glass windows hide fractal geometries passed down in secret. Across the globe, sacred structures have always held the same silent message: real architecture is a ritual. And Solomon, he didn't build alone. Scripture tells us about Hiram Abif, the craftsman from Tyre. On the surface, he was just a skilled artisan. But in mystical readings, he becomes something more: an initiate, a master of fire and metal, a bridge between pagan craft and Hebrew revelation. In him, ancient technologies and sacred intent merged. He forged not only utensils, but the interface between man and the divine. But here's the question that scholars and mystics alike have wrestled with for centuries. Where did Solomon get the plans? The Bible says God revealed them, but apocryphal texts and Gnostic scrolls raise deeper, darker questions. The Testament of Solomon, a strange and powerful text from the 2nd or 3rd century, tells a very different tale. In it, Solomon doesn't just interact with angels, but with demons. He commands them questions, then binds them. He builds not through divine whispers alone, but through knowledge torn from the shadows. One figure stands out: Asmodeus, the same demon who roams Persian legends. In the Testament, Solomon captures him using a ring, a mystical object given by an angel bearing the seal of divine power. And with this ring, Solomon forces spirits to reveal truths hidden from man, including perhaps the secrets of the temple itself. Now ask yourself, what kind of man commands both heaven and hell? What kind of knowledge did Solomon possess that angels and demons alike obeyed his voice? This isn't just the story of a king. This is the legend of a magician, a mystic, a builder of bridges between worlds. And as we explore further in this video, be prepared to question everything you thought you knew. Because Solomon didn't just leave behind a temple, he left a riddle, a code etched in stone. And those who dare to decode it never see the world the same way again. In the last chapter, we entered the mystery: Solomon, the master of names, the builder of a temple that transcended matter. But behind every sacred structure, there is a force unseen yet commanding. For Solomon, that force was bound to a single object: a ring. This was no ordinary ring. This was a seal of dominion, an instrument through which Solomon could bend unseen forces to his will. It allowed him to command the invisible, and under its power, spirits were compelled to labor in silence. Every stone placed in the Temple of Solomon was moved not by human hands, but by presences that defied the eye. The temple rose from the earth through the hands of the hidden. To some, this account is unsettling. It clashes with the neat and sacred image taught in religious tradition. But to those who walk the path of initiation, it resonates deeply because it reveals the core principle of all true alchemy. Light is not the absence of darkness. It is its transformation. The temple was not built through naivete or passive holiness. It was forged through mastery by taking chaos and bringing it into divine order. Solomon didn't reject the shadow. He faced it, he named it, he sealed it. And in doing so, he revealed the deeper truth. Spiritual growth is not purity through avoidance, but integration through understanding. This vision of the temple as both a sacred structure and a mirror of the soul became foundational to Freemasonry. In Masonic teachings, the Temple of Solomon is not a historical monument, but a symbolic structure that is rebuilt again and again within the initiate, not with stone or mortar, but with signs, symbols, and sacred knowledge. Each Masonic degree doesn't lead deeper into a building, but into a state of awareness. Each ritual is a journey inward. Each symbolic chamber opened in the temple is a chamber opened in the self. That's why the Temple of Solomon never truly disappeared. It may have been torn down by armies, but in the esoteric world, it continues to rise stone by stone inside the soul of every seeker. The temple is a labyrinth, not a hall. It offers no grand entrance, no obvious path. There are no signs pointing the way. Every step demands stillness. Every symbol is a puzzle. Every doorway is a challenge. And at the center of this labyrinth lies something unexpected: emptiness. The Holy of Holies. The most sacred chamber was completely empty. No idol, no throne, no object, nothing but space. It was a chamber meant not to be filled with things, but to be filled with presence. The Shekinah, the divine presence, did not reside in gold or image. It hovered in silence. This is the mystery at the heart of Solomon's temple. It was built not to contain God, but to create space for what cannot be named, a sanctuary for the ineffable. On the surface, Solomon's life is the story of a king, but just beneath that surface lies another tale, that of a magician. And like every great magician of myth, he possessed a tool of great power, his ring. But this ring was not just jewelry. It was not meant to adorn, it was meant to bind. According to Jewish tradition, it bore the Shem HaMephorash, the 72-letter name of God, engraved upon its surface. With this name, Solomon held dominion over what others feared to even name. But to truly grasp the ring's power, we must first understand something deeper, the power of the name. In the ancient world, names were more than words. They were vibrations, frequencies, essences. To know the true name of a thing was to hold its nature in your hand. To name was to control. To speak a name was to invoke the structure of reality behind it. You see this idea across ancient cultures. In Egypt, knowing the hidden name of Ra granted control over the sun god. In Hinduism, mantras aren't just chants, they are the very sound form of a deity. In Hebrew mysticism, the name of God is not spoken, not because it is forbidden, but because it is power. To speak, it is to channel it. Solomon, according to the Kabbalah, knew not one but all 72 of the sacred names. These were drawn from a mystical interpretation of 3 verses in Exodus 14, 19, 21. Each verse has 72 Hebrew letters. When the verses are arranged and permuted letter by letter, they form the 72 names of God. Each name is more than a word. It is a code, a vibration, a cosmic key. Together they form the Shem HaMephorash, not a single word, but an energetic matrix, a ladder of frequencies, a divine keyboard. The one who bears it, say the rabbis of the Zohar, touches the roots of creation. Solomon's ring engraved with these sacred codes gave him power not just over spirits, but over reality itself. In the Testament of Solomon, an apocryphal text dating between the 2nd and 4th centuries, we read how the ring was given to him by the archangel Michael. With it, Solomon summons, interrogates, and binds spiritual entities. The first of these is Orneus, a spirit that drains the energy of the young. Solomon does not destroy Orneus, he interviews him. He seeks to understand. What is your origin, your nature? Which star governs your power? This distinction is crucial. Solomon doesn't wage war against the spirit world, he studies it. He seeks wisdom, not domination. Because true wisdom is not about expulsion, it's about integration. Over time, Solomon captures and records 72 spirits. Each has a name, a form, a domain. Some have many faces. Some ride serpents or dragons. Some grant knowledge. Others bring confusion. But each is a piece of the same puzzle, expressions of natural power, of human psychology, of spiritual force. These 72 spirits appear again in the Ars Goetia, the first section of the famous grimoire Le Megaton, also known as the Lesser Key of Solomon. Later traditions would call them the governors of hell. But hell here must be understood as it was in the Greek sense, Hades, the unconscious realm, the shadow within. In time, these spirits were vilified, demonized in medieval lore. But in the Solomonic texts of old, they were viewed more neutrally, more as astral intelligences, raw cosmic energies. Esoteric traditions later suggested something deeper. Each of these 72 spirits is the inverted mirror of one of the 72 names of God. They are not separate, they are reflections, shadow and light, fear and power, one and the same. Here again, the alchemy of Solomon emerges, the fusion of name and number, darkness and light. Eliphas Levi, the great French occultist, once wrote, "The ring of Solomon is the circle of the will armed with the sword of the word. He who possesses it justly fears neither hell nor heaven." But he warned the ring is not physical, it is symbolic, a metaphor for the power within the one who truly knows. To possess the ring is to master your own nature, to speak the word, and to fearlessly face your inner shadow. And perhaps this is the deepest revelation of the Testament of Solomon. The spirits Solomon subdues are not just external beings, they are reflections of human emotions, fears, desires, and obsessions. Each bound entity is a piece of the psyche brought into light and transformed. In this way, Solomon becomes not just king or magician, but the perfect alchemist. He does not cast out the darkness. He gives it form. He makes it serve. He orders his demons and turns them into builders of the inner temple. This truth echoes far beyond Judaism. It appears in Hermeticism, in Sufism, in Gnosticism, even in strands of Tantric Hinduism. To master the world is not to conquer it, but to conquer oneself, to turn impulse into intention, to place the chaos within you in service of something sacred. Even in the Quran, Solomon or Suleiman is recognized as a prophet who spoke with birds, commanded winds, and bent the will of jinn. He is remembered not just for what he ruled, but for what he understood. Previously, we saw Solomon not merely as a ruler, but as a soul who confronted shadow, who turned spirits into servants and names into keys. But what happens when a man holds too much power and begins to feel the weight of divine knowledge? In Surah An-Naml of the Quran, we are told of Solomon's immense dominion, how even the spirits, the jinn, labored at his command. They built for him palaces beyond imagination, fetched entire thrones from distant lands in the blink of an eye. His will moved across space and matter as if the world itself bent to his thought. But then comes a quiet, sobering image. When Solomon dies, his body remains upright, supported only by his staff. And the jinn, unaware of his passing, continue to serve him faithfully. It's only when worms finally consume the wood of his staff that his corpse collapses, and only then do they realize their king is gone. This moment is haunting. It reveals a paradox. Even the subtlest forces in creation bow to the illusion of authority. Power, it seems, can persist through silence and stillness, but it is not eternal. And true power, it lies not in appearance, not in spectacle, but in something deeper, in wisdom, sealed with silence. Solomon's ring then becomes more than a magical object. It becomes a symbol of will harmonized with knowledge, a union of intent and understanding. It represents dominion not through force, but through alignment, language over chaos, order over noise. And what of the 72 spirits? Far from the infernal horrors portrayed in later medieval superstition, they were in truth guides, teachers from the abyss. Involuntary perhaps, but meaningful nonetheless. They speak a language not of fear, but of trial. And only those who dare enter silence can begin to understand what they say. Together, the name, the ring, and the spirits form a mystical triad. Name vibration, ring focus, spirit force. Alone, each is incomplete. Without all three, the structure collapses. But united, they build worlds. And that is why, in the ancient traditions of spiritual alchemy, Solomon is not remembered merely as a sovereign. He is honored as Magus Regis, the Mage King, the one who commanded not armies but energies, the alchemist of the word, the master of sacred names. But wisdom, true wisdom, is not gentle, it is not comforting. It is a blade sharpened by insight that cuts through illusion so precisely that for a moment the world feels naked. Its familiar shapes dissolve, its colors bleed. Solomon, known in Hebrew as Shlomo, a name rooted in shalom, meaning peace, carries that name not because he lived without conflict, but because he faced the abyss and stayed. When he asked God for wisdom in the Book of Kings, it was not for cleverness to judge disputes. It was not for strategy or power. He asked for access to the Logos, the living creative word, the original vibration through which all was formed. The Hebrew word used is chokmah, wisdom, not in the sense of accumulated facts, but the divine spark itself, the fire before form. In Kabbalistic teaching, chokmah is the second sephira on the tree of life directly beneath Kether the crown. It is the flash of inspiration within the divine mind. And this wisdom is no gentle flame, it is pure fire. And as with all fire, if touched before one is ready, it burns. In apocryphal texts like the Wisdom of Solomon, though written later by Hellenized Jews, the king speaks of wisdom not as an idea but as a presence, feminine, seductive, luminous, terrifying. He says she sits beside the throne of God, and that he loved her more than kingship, more than wealth, more than glory. This is no metaphor, it is a mystical image. Wisdom is not something possessed. She is something pursued, and to embrace her is to surrender. This motif, the king in love with wisdom, echoes through Sufi poetry and Orphic hymns. It is the union of the mystic and the logos, a cosmic marriage. But like every divine union, it demands something radical: fidelity, not to a person but to truth, to insight. And truth, unlike fantasy, rarely brings comfort. This is where Solomon's story darkens. For the more he knew, the more burdened he became. He understood the rhythms of the stars, the movement of spirits, the pull of the psyche, the names of angels, and the cravings of demons. He even spoke the language of birds, which in Sufi mysticism is the language of liberated souls. He could interpret dreams, silences, vibrations, and he knew the secret name, the unpronounceable. But this fire of wisdom was too vast for a single man to bear. The book of Ecclesiastes, attributed to Solomon but composed later, offers a profound insight into this weight. In its pages, the king no longer speaks with triumph but with weariness. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. This is not pessimism, it is initiation. To see clearly is to see the impermanence of all things. To understand is to know that the gears of the world spin upon fleeting fragile axes. The one who hears the word also hears the void. Revelation, then, is never far from ruin. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon becomes the disillusioned sage. He declares all is vanity. The Hebrew word used, hevel, means vapor, breath, mist, something that slips through your fingers. Reality to him becomes a fleeting echo, a puppet show, its strings too visible to enjoy. Literary critic and self-styled Kabbalist Harold Bloom called Solomon the first figure of the divided self, a man torn between what he knows and what he can live. He becomes both master and victim of his own insight. This internal fracture appears again in Kabbalistic texts like the Sefer HaBahir, where wisdom is described as a tree that only blooms when rooted in non-being. Supreme knowledge, they say, is knowing that you know nothing. And so Solomon becomes the ultimate paradox. He is the wisest and therefore the most lost. He knows the laws of the cosmos, but not the mystery of his own heart. Nowhere is this clearer than in his personal life. The man who claimed loyalty to divine wisdom is the same man who wandered among 700 wives and 300 concubines. Not as a hedonist, but as a seeker. A man grasping for something nobody could give total understanding of the primordial feminine. These women, often portrayed as temptations in religious texts, are seen in esotericism as archetypes, manifestations of inner aspects of the soul. Each woman is a mirror, a gate, a force Solomon tried to absorb but never fully could. It is the eternal tension, the feminine and the logos, the dance between soul and word. It fascinates. It entangles, but it never resolves. In Islamic mystical tradition, Solomon Sulaiman is revered as Al-Hakim the Wise. But even in that reverence there is caution. It is said that his wisdom led to arrogance, and that arrogance allowed a jinn to impersonate him and take his throne. In the Lithuanian stream of Kabbalah, Solomon is called the master of the middle gate, the one who walked between light and shadow, because neither realm could claim him. He crossed them both. But the more gates one crosses, the easier it is to forget the way home. And that is where Solomon becomes more than a man. He becomes a mirror, because everyone who walks the path of true wisdom must one day arrive at the same threshold, the edge between order and madness, between knowing and unknowing, between the word and the abyss. In walking the line between wisdom and madness, Solomon became something more than a king. He became a paradox. But to remain lucid while standing in that paradox, that is the true art. And that's where our story deepened. The secret isn't to flee from the threshold between knowledge and delirium. The secret is to remain clear-eyed while standing inside it. As Osho once said, wisdom is like the sky, it allows every cloud to pass, but never confuses itself with any of them. In his highest moments, Solomon embodied that sky, vast, still, and observant. But in others, he became lost within the swirling clouds of his own understanding. And it's no accident that the very ring used to seal Spirit Solomon's famed ring was also a symbol of ego held in check. Only the one who can master his ego can bear the storm that comes with revelation. Only the one who can sit in silence can speak with true authority. Solomon conversed with angels, but he also listened to the void, and his wisdom, as radiant as it was, came with a cost. It was both his crown and his burden. This is the eternal law of the mystical path. There is no light without shadow, no revelation without reckoning. To see the world as it truly is and still choose to love it, that is the price of lucidity. Though King Solomon died thousands of years ago, his presence has never truly faded. Instead, his image has continually evolved, reshaping itself with every age. In some eras, he returns as the archetypal initiate, in others as the patron of ceremonial magic, and sometimes as the invisible architect of the inner world. In Hermetic tradition, Solomon is more than a biblical king. He is a symbol of universal knowledge hidden and applied. He represents the spirit who grasps the blueprint of creation and uses it not only to ascend the soul, but to command it. Yet before we dive into grimoires and rituals, we must first understand how this image crystallized through time. And for that, we must pass through the veiled corridors of secret societies, initiatic brotherhoods, and manuscripts that moved in whispers, passed from abbots to alchemists, from royal courts to candlelit laboratories. Let us begin with Freemasonry, arguably the most enduring esoteric tradition of the West. Within it, Solomon is the master archetype of the builder, the divine architect who brings form to chaos through sacred proportion. In every Masonic lodge, the Temple of Solomon is not just a story, it is a symbol, a structure rebuilt ritually in each initiation, not with stone, but with meaning. In medieval grimoires, those handwritten books of ceremonial magic from the 13th to 17th centuries, Solomon appears even more boldly. Here he is not portrayed as a king, but as an absolute magician, commander of spirits, forger of seals, master of conjurations, ruler of the magical circle. The most famous of these texts is the Clavicula Salomonis, the Keys of Solomon, a detailed compendium of magical procedures for invoking angels, crafting talismans, purifying tools, and channeling astral forces. While its most common version was compiled during the Renaissance, its roots reach deep into older traditions. And across every iteration, one truth remains magical: authority flows from Solomon, from the one who didn't just know the names but knew how to wield them. These texts are meticulous. They instruct which metals to use on which days of the week, how to trace protective circles, what incantations to speak, and which planetary alignments to observe. This is not crude superstition, it is a refined hermetic system built on the ancient law of correspondence, as above, so below. The alignment of stars reflects the alignment of soul. And then we come to the Lemegeton, or the Lesser Key of Solomon, which takes it even further. It catalogs the 72 spirits of the Goetia, complete with their names, sigils, ranks, and areas of influence. These texts claim that Solomon sealed these entities in bronze vessels closed with the authority of his ring. That if the rituals are followed with discipline, modern initiates can summon these forces not to dominate the world, but to acquire knowledge, healing, and spiritual defense. But here lies the heart of the mystery. The Solomonic grimoires are not manuals for world domination. They are blueprints for inner transformation. Each spirit represents an energy within. Each seal reflects an aspect of the psyche. Each invocation is a challenge to one's own consciousness. The purpose is not to control the external world, it is to master the internal one. Ritual is discipline. Magic is precision. And the magician's greatest enemy is himself. While the grimoires were concerned with ceremonial acts, Kabbalah viewed Solomon through another lens as the bearer of Da'at, the hidden sephirah that connects the opposite poles of the tree of life. Fittingly, the name Shlomo also echoes the word Shalem, the complete one. In practical Kabbalah, the 72 angelic names from the Shem HaMephorash are often paired with the 72 Goetic demons. This is not contradiction, it is unity. The mirror of heaven reflects the shadow of hell, and Solomon, he is the point where both converge. The paradox personified. In some schools like that of Isaac Luria, Solomon is seen as a manifestation of the tzaddik, the righteous one, who sustains the world through his internal balance. But even the tzaddik bears a flaw, a wound, because knowledge always comes at a cost, and Solomon paid that cost with his soul. In Islamic esotericism, Solomon, Suleiman, is honored as a prophet king who spoke to animals, commanded the winds, and ruled the jinn. Among the Sufis, he becomes a symbol of the enlightened soul who has mastered the four elements. In the mystical philosophy of Hikmat al-Ishraq, the wisdom of illumination, he is invoked as the ruler of the inner kingdom. Even in Gnostic Christianity, Solomon appears in apocryphal works like Pistis Sophia. His wisdom is likened to gnosis, the salvific knowledge of divine mystery. Yet despite his gifts, he is not without fault. Gnostic texts portray him as one who, though illuminated, became entangled in worldly illusions, and that in itself becomes the final nuance. Because Solomon is not just the image of the victorious initiate, he is also the image of the fallen one, the seeker who knew too much, who flew too close to the flame, who stumbled under the weight of his own insight. But that does not disqualify him. On the contrary, it humanizes him. In true esotericism, the fall is not failure, it is part of the journey. There can be no ascent without descent, no light without shadow. Solomon lived both, fully. Today his name is still whispered in Rosicrucian circles, printed in alchemical manuscripts, invoked in Enochian rites, and honored in modern hermetic systems. But more than that, he lives in everyone who dares to build their inner temple, who dares to pass through the veil. If this video stirred something in you, something deeper than mere curiosity, share it with a fellow seeker. If you feel ready to continue unveiling the hidden layers of history, leave your seal in the comments below. Because as Solomon once said, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Now it's your turn.